Okay, time for a special episode. Trill Symbionts. Or, well, yeah. Are they really? Anyway, this character popped up in the recent episodes. And do I hate the idea of the character? No. Do I think it was a stupid idea? Yeah, actually. But we'll get into that later. So, what did people in general find to be weird about this? One, it's Dax. This episode makes Dax to be the oldest known symbiont. However, for reasons I'll get to later, I'm not sure that means as much as people think it does, quite frankly. And so let's get started at the beginning. The Trill race are known in, to be honest, this is something that in from real world chronology perspective got brought up the first time Trill were seen on screen in an episode. Odan was seen to be a symbiont in the very first episode where Trill were even mentioned, which is the one where he infamously gets temporarily bonded to Riker, which didn't go very well. And it turned out that humans were not compatible to be joined that way long term, and that it was causing him, medical problems that needed, well, let's just say it would be impossible for him to remain joined for more than 2 days, something like that. But, you know, jo- Oden joined with Riker did actually work as a joining, even if it was only a temporary one. Because Riker and Odan were able to, merge, and thus whoever was a host to the Odan symbiote after Riker had an impression of Riker's personality in Odan. Perhaps not, that strong because not joined for very long, but Kirill Odan did presumably have at least some of Riker's um, memories. The funny thing here, though, is the whole the fact that Odan had tried to be romantically associated with Crusher. That's actually something that was a plot point in the original episode that I personally thought was stupid. It's like having the alien of the week try to be a romantic interest came up way too often. Again, I personally think it was dumb, but it got brought up as a way to investigate Trill culture because Trill have that whole prohibition against reassociation thing, which it's portrayed as being a matter of practicality, not about, religious anything. They do it because they don't want the hosts to become like obsessive compulsive over and try to relive the life of a previous host. And the idea is that it's better for the host to just, continue being themselves and not try to take on the life of a previous host. Because as far as I know, the only thing that the new host actually gets from this is um the symbiote. They don't actually, take on the whatever property that the previous host had, they just get the symbiote. Uh, that's it. The previous host, family or whatever next of kin, uh, is whoever has their stuff. Ye I can see how that would actually create some rather weird problems if the new host tries to uh, resume the life that the previous host had been living. Anyway, though, reassociation is, well, hmm, it's not a prohibition against doing stuff that the previous host would have done, but it's against trying to live their life in general. So you will often have the new host, like use people known by the previous host as contacts and stuff like that. It's not like they completely avoid them. It's just that they, hmm, they, yeah, it's complicated. Anyway, though, that's getting off on a side tangent. But so going back to Illidax. Illidax gets used as a character to talk about Cisco. Yes, the Cisco, in terms of Sam attempting to find and understand what happened to the Cisco, which he apparently hasn't come back yet. That's interesting. But beside the point. So things that people about weird side. One is the age. Now, one thing that you note here is that the practice of joining is something the Trill started in the 12th century. TNG happens in the 23rd century. So the Trill Symbiosis Commission doesn't actually have information dating back more than 1100 years. So while symbiotes living more than 500 years was considered um, atypical and longer than expected, they don't they didn't really have a massive amount of information there. And also the whole like 800 years thing was something that came up in the 32nd century. It was said that 800 years is exceptionally long and that most of them didn't live that long. Yeah. Okay. Another thing that came up that people found to be rather interesting is that this character is part Cardassian, part Trill. Um, thing is, this isn't actually the first time we've seen a part Trill as a host. This guy from DS9 in the episode Children of Time is part human. Yeah. Well, I mean, like we have established, Riker was able to be a host temporarily, and some of the stuff that we have would okay. The logic behind who is compatible and who isn't is a aspect of biochemistry, and the fact that somewhere around 50% of the Trill population is biochemically compatible. Well, also, is that presumably biochemical compatibility is a inherited trait. So, Jadzia Dax being, or well, Jadzia being chemically compatible so that she could host the Dax symbiont. Well, her descendants would presumably also be biochemically compatible, or at least have a good chance of it. So, having someone who is part human being compatible makes sense. Who the heck this Illa person is, we don't know. Like, seriously. We know that it's someone who is part of the Federation and is working as a part of Starfleet and is a professor at Starfleet Academy and is Cardassian Trill hybrid who is currently the host of the Dax Symbiont, and that's basically the only thing we know. We have no idea who her ancestors are. We have very little information beyond that. Also, one could argue that the Dax symbiont is probably getting close to the end of its life. We don't really know. That's not something they explored in the episode. But yeah, the idea that Trill are able to be hosts even when only part Trill. Yeah, apparently that's legit. I still don't think this was a particularly good usage, but hey, whatever. Um, Honestly, that's about it. Yeah, they didn't really have a whole lot to go over here. It's like, oh yeah, also this one shows the Tau symbiont to be what appears to be exceptionally large compared to the previous ones. Oh yeah, there is one other thing. We don't really understand how they reproduce. Like, also it's like symbionts, it's really this aspect of the symbionts when the symbionts are not joined and what the symbionts do when they're not joined barely came up in DS9 and has not been touched outside DS9. And the the part of the reason why there are so few symbionts is because they don't actually have a very high reproduction rate. Humanoid Trill have a higher reproduction rate than the symbionts do, which is part of the reason why the Symbiosis Commission was, um, trying to hide the fact that 50% of the Trill population was chemically compatible with being a host, which is an interesting point that is weird later on. Is that in an emergency, having a symbiont get rejoined is a thing. It did come up in DS9, and that's how Dax was relocated from Jadzia to Esri. Is that Jadzia got mortally wounded, and so they uh, relocated the symbiont to Esri. It also makes me wonder just how common it is for symbionts to actually die of old age rather than dying from, some sort of misadventure. Because, 500 years, that's a lot of time where you could, get killed in a shuttle accident or something. Yeah, that's a thing. That's not something that actually came up in any of the stuff discussing how long the symbionts can live. Anyways, yeah. So if you were using Trill in a TTRPG, honestly, going either way works. Because, like, it's like a hybrid would, I would assume, be less likely to be compatible. But given the fact that it's apparently an ancestral thing, as um, Yedrin Dax is actually a descendant of Jadzia, um, a hybrid who is a descendant of someone who is a Trill who is compatible, yeah, A hybrid who is a descendant of someone who was not compatible is probably not going to be though. So, you know. Oh yeah, also, there is actually one other thing. Trill actually do have several rather uh odd biochemical whatevers. Like one of the things that's notable about trill physiology is that trill actually have a lower body temperature than humans. Huh, interesting. And their internal physiology is significantly different than humans. Here is someone attempting to do a medical scan. Um, this makes it look like the symbiont takes up like half of the chest cavity, which feels wrong when you look at the picture of Odan. But anyways, oh yeah, that's one of the other interesting things is that on Gaia, in that time pocket, they actually had several people who were part Trill. However, there's only one Dax symbiont. They don't have the spawning pool, so that there was only ever going to be one symbiont on Gaia, and that would be Dax, which is interesting. Oh, and also is that because Lisa is technically a descendant of Worf, she's probably yeah, it says human Trill, but it's probably human slash Klingon slash Trill. Although it really wasn't mentioned in the episode, it was something in the Star Trek encyclopedia claiming she was a descendant of Worf. Hmm. Anyways, but yeah, I think I'm about done here. Alrighty. Well, see you guys later.